The words we just read together give a scientific explanation, though poetic, of the stars and how they impact on our lives. It has been part of our eternal human quest to look to that which is bigger than ourselves and try to figure out where we fit. I'm going to talk today mostly about one particular view, that of the Greeks. Then they looked at the stars, they saw constellations, and I look at constellation charts, and even if they draw the lines in between them and then draw the animal or the god or goddess that's supposed to be around, I'm going to say, how did they ever see those gods and goddesses and animals up there? And I think they saw them because they needed to see them, and it gave some meaning to their lives. One thing that I'm beginning to understand about myself is that if I plan an outdoor event in Winston-Salem, it will rain. Between the baseball game and last night's stargazing, so far I'm 0 for 2. But I speak on this topic today because during this time of the year, on my birthday, is the peak of the Perseid meteor shower. Depending on the year, between 10 and 200 meteorites or falling stars are visible per hour. And they seem to originate in the northern sky from the constellation Perseus, and hence called the Perseid meteor shower. And there's lots of constellations near that are related to these myths. And I want to go through these myths and keep track. This is harder than keeping score at baseball or watching your soap opera because it gets complicated. But Perseus was the son of Zeus, ruler of the gods, and his name reflects that, Perseus. See, Zeus had fallen in love with Danae, the beautiful daughter of Achilles, the king of Argos. An oracle had predicted that Danae would someday bear a son who would kill the king. So Achilles hid her in a bronze or an ivory tower, depending on the story. But Zeus knew of her beauty, and in one day he changed himself into a shower of gold dust so he could drift through the cell of her, or window of her cell, and she became pregnant with Perseus. And so that the meteor shower that occurs is a reminder of this remarkable conception. When Perseus was born, the king Achilles put him and his mother in a wooden chest and threw it into the sea. But instead of drowning, the chest floated to the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman rescued them. As for Perseus, he is most remembered for killing Medusa and rescuing Andromeda, whose constellations are very nearby. In fact, there's 2 stars that represent Medusa's eyes in the constellation of Perseus. Now, Medusa was one of 3 sisters, and they were originally very beautiful, but Medusa committed an indiscretion with Poseidon one night in the temple of Athena. And Medusa became pregnant, and Athena became mad. So mad that she changed Medusa into a hideous monster with huge teeth and a protruding tongue, and claws in place of hands, and snakes in place of hair, and looks that would turn anyone to stone. Needless to say, after this transformation, Medusa wasn't particularly popular. Instead, her head became the ultimate prize, and anybody who would chop it off would be an instant hero. But none were foolish enough to try, until Perseus one day made a casual promise to a man that wanted to marry his mother. But Perseus didn't want this man to marry his mother, and the king that tried to keep his wishes a secret from Perseus by telling Perseus that he was going to marry another woman. And so Perseus said, well, I really want to up the ante, so he marries this other woman instead of my mother. And he says, if you wish to marry her, I will do anything, including give you Medusa's head. And the king said, deal. Athena had been listening, and this was the moment she had been waiting for, someone to strike back at her worst enemy. So she gave Perseus her shiny shield, and she said, only look at her reflection, never look directly at her. And so Perseus came across the three sisters asleep, and looking at his shield, he carefully studied each figure. When he found, and he was sure that he had found Medusa, he cut off her head. After that, I love these stories. The winged horse Pegasus flew out of her body. For Pegasus had been conceived by Poseidon in the temple of Athena. But Athena said, there's going to be no baby born, and sealed it inside of Medusa. But now that Medusa was dead, Pegasus, the flying horse, was free. I don't think they studied genetics too much here. The sisters awoke, and they were going to try to kill Perseus, but he jumped on the back of Poseidon and rode back to Argos, where he found Andromeda chained to the rocks as a sacrifice to a sea monster. Now this is interesting. If you look at the constellation book, Andromeda, the constellation is somehow part of the horse Pegasus. But they kind of overlap each other. Now, Andromeda was the daughter of Cepheus and Cassiopeia, and they also are constellations. Cassiopeia is the one that looks kind of like a W by the North Star, and Cepheus kind of looks like a trapezoid. Well, turns out that Cassiopeia, or I don't know, she was quite the vain person. Apparently, she and Andromeda were very, very beautiful, and because she was so beautiful, she felt the need to go down to the sea and taunt Poseidon, saying, "Ha ha, we're prettier than your sea nymphs. We are just so pretty." Well, that made the nymphs jealous, and Poseidon had to take action. And for Cassiopeia, he threw her into the sky, and the W is really kind of a throne in the minds of the Greeks, and he did it so that put it near the North Star so that at least once a night her throne would be upside down. And so there was Andromeda on the rocks. And Perseus came and said, I will rescue her if I can marry her. And they agreed. And so using Medusa's head, he turned the monster into stone. And after killing the sea monster and rescuing Andromeda, Cassiopeia changed her mind about Perseus marrying her daughter and said that she's going to marry someone else. These are real soap operas. But there was somebody sent to disrupt the wedding, but Perseus was victorious, and he was able to stop the warring parties and turned Cassiopeia and her husband Cephas into stone as well. And that's when Poseidon threw them up into the heavens. Now, Perseus and Andromeda lived pretty well after that, and Perseus gave the shield and Medusa's head back to Athena. And later he participated in an athletic contest. This is kind of the epilogue. And he won the discus. And he threw it so far that it went so far into the grandstand and it hit King Achilles in the foot. This was the man who wanted to kill him long ago. The injury was not serious, but it startled the king so much that he died. Thus fulfilling the oracle. What amazes me when I look at Greek and Roman mythology is how ungodly the gods are. In this story, both Zeus and Poseidon have sex with mortals. This is probably non-consensual sex since the mortals were basically powerless. When Athena gets jealous over Poseidon and Medusa's affair, does she punish Poseidon, the god? No! She turns Medusa into a monster. And furthermore, she turns Medusa's sisters into monsters for no apparent reason. The humans are basically powerless in the face of the gods. King Cephas sits idly by while Andromeda is tied to the rocks. Basically, the gods represent power, but they abuse their power. The human characters are powerless to do anything. And the only noble characters in this story are Pegasus and Perseus, and they are both half god and half mortal. In the myths, these demigods are the real heroes. They protect the humans from the gods and the monsters that the gods create. This theme is also apparent in the story of Hercules, who is fathered by Zeus. And he killed the lion, the hydra, the snake with 9 heads, and went down to the underworld and fetched the 3-headed hound of hell. And because of his labors, Hercules was elevated from demigod to god status. And Pegasus was also able to fly all the way up to Mount Olympus. Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War, was the offspring of a divine mother and mortal father. Dionysus, also fathered by Zeus, became the god of wine and ecstasy. Wild feasts in his honor were very popular. It's interesting to me that the heroes of mythology are neither god nor human. And I think of that in relationship to placing them in the heavens. There seems to be such an incredible gulf when you stand on the earth and you look out. And I think it's probably increased as we've gained understanding of how far away that these things are. And that even that the stars we see today may have burned out thousands of years ago, but all we can see is the light of the past. It's such an incredible gulf. And to bridge this gulf, the Greeks created these half-human, half-gods that allowed some connection to the vast universe. And I wonder how much these Greek stories influenced how the Greeks understood Jesus. Consider Jesus' conception, often portrayed in paintings as a golden shaft of light falling upon the Virgin Mary, very similar to Perseus' conception. In the Apostles' Creed, there's a statement about Jesus that he descended into hell, and Ephesians states that Jesus descended into the lower parts of the earth. Compare this to Hercules, who descended into the underworld. Consider Matthew's account of the resurrection. A flash of lightning, and it was like Hercules, who after he died on earth, he willingly walked into his death was that he willingly walked into a funeral pyre that had been prepared for him. And there was a great flash of lightning, and Zeus took his son to join the immortals. Dionysus, the god of wine, half god, half human. Wine, the major component of communion. And the Gospel of John reports that the first miracle of Jesus was turning water into wine. Apollo, another son of Zeus, was associated with healing, as was Jesus. So when the Jesus stories were translated into Greek culture, he was perceived as the offspring of a father god and a mortal woman. And he had the combined attributes of the greatest Greek sons of God. The New Testament is written in Greek, and it's through this cultural lens that we learn about Jesus. And the stories are so colored by the mythology that there's probably little hope of separating and trying to figure out what the historical Jesus was like. But we can look to the stars and step out of our literal mind of trying to find explanations for everything and see the wonder. And wonder that somehow we are connected. Somehow, as our reading, we are part of that stardust, that original creation. When I think of the science of astronomy, it becomes more and more the search for our origins. How did it start? What was is the universe self-sustaining, or was it created, or did it appear, disappear? Is it going to contract again? Is it expanding? All these questions are in search of the answer. Where did we come from? When we look at the stars, we're looking at the past. And then I think of the practice of astrology, developed in what is now Iran. Ancient peoples charted the stars Probably first just so they would understand when it was a good time to plant. Because sometimes there's good weather during the season of winter that might tempt you to put seeds in your garden, but if they checked the stars and said it's not right to do it now, they knew they would have to wait. And then they continued to develop it into saying, well, certain patterns seem to follow the stars. And it got thinking about, well, maybe people's personalities are related to these stars. I have a theory that's unsubstantiated by any research that I think of an agrarian society. And women who are working in the field at different times of the year. And that baby is with them in a different way depending on when they're born. You think of the bonding of what happens to a baby in those first critical months. In the winter, baby's going to be wrapped, probably held close. During harvest time, the baby's going to be on the back, so the hands are free. During the midsummer, where it's so hot, the baby's going to probably not be held close at all. Maybe that's why us Leos are so gregarious, because we're just reaching out for everything. That they're patterns they recognized. And they may have been more true then than they are now as we've become more disconnected from nature. We're in air conditioning and we don't, or heat in the winter. Our lives are not the same as the ancient people. But astrology came to be a way to look at the future by the stars. And I think each of us experienced the stars in different ways. Some of us who may have grown up in cities may not have seen the stars. Where I grew up, the stars were so present and so many that you could see shooting stars that were just so tiny that you barely just saw their motion as they were over the deep lake that had no lights. We no longer, as the Greeks do, have to feel powerless pawns of the gods. And we can certainly have higher morals than the gods. But it is our privilege to look at the sky. On a dark hillside in the country, we can reconnect to the wonder that has fascinated humanity. The light which was created 1 million years ago is only now reaching our eyes. We watch, we wait, and every so often we catch a falling star. A last hurrah for a meteor as it merges with our atmosphere. We see it vaporize into the air we breathe. We inhale and exhale the universe. We may have invented the gods, projecting our human triumphs and failings into deepest space. The gods and goddesses, we may be their parents. Our ancestors saw them as equal to the universe. We who have evolved from that universe, these stars as gods and goddesses may be falling. A sparkling shower of divinity. Let us welcome them as they fall. Let us receive the divinity that we created. Let us receive the divinity that recreates us. One perspective on stars. I'd like to hear other people's impressions when they look into the heavens. Sherry, speak loud.
All of that stuff about the stars is based on living in the northern hemisphere in that part of the world. It's fascinating to me to know that people, indigenous peoples of Australia and South America, have a totally different collection of myths. They see a totally different collection of stars.
Jim.
I was interested to note, I think Newsweek had an article recently about what astrophysicists feel is going to happen. And apparently the world or the universe will slowly go out. The stars will flash and go out. And in approximately 1 trillion years or so, it will be a blank field. Now that's something to think about. Of course, it's only a guess.
Comment about growing up in the city and not seeing the stars. When I was about 11, went to summer camp in Wisconsin. I'm from Chicago, and in Chicago you can see the big difference. They woke us up late at night, or it felt late to me, and they told us, all right, come out. And they told us there was a creature named Red Moly, it's a monster. Used to be a man's church for monsters. They knew us. Red Moly would get you. To these city kids. We're trying to creep out. It's dead black. We're going into the woods with these concerts. And if anybody made it was get out to the middle. They could tell that the space had opened up. The trees were on the edge of the corner. And they told us all to sit down. We sat. Be quiet. Look up. And we all looked up and just floored. Just floored. It was incredible. I had never seen anything like it. 11 years old, and I had never seen the Milky Way. It's just magical.
Yes.
I was listening to NPR this week, and they said that they're concerned, the scientists are becoming concerned because there are so few places now where you can actually see the stars well. We're having so much light pollution.
One of the things I miss from being raised in Michigan was walking on a cold winter's night with a little snow on the ground, hearing my boots crunch, and looking up and seeing so many stars they almost touched each other. And now my friends write me about it.
I've been reading Galileo's Dawn recently, and I should have known it from my study of history, but it brought it all back. What a large part the church has played in stifling scientific investigation.
Gail was talking about seeing the stars. I think the most incredible display I've seen is when I was sailing out in the ocean with my father. We were way away from land, so there wasn't any surface light. And seeing at night, you're in this little boat, you can't see anything around you except the stars above you. I really felt the feeling of the guy who said, "Oh God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small."
Let us join in singing hymn number 51.